Now we're going to go in and talk about the post-Avraham Stern, Lehi. They're quite different from when Abraham was there, and a lot has happened. We will start by talking about a man named Yitzhak Yezernitsky, later to be known as Yitzhak Shamir. He had quite a familiar origin to Stern, living in a secluded village in Poland. Yitzhak was a member of a Zionist revisionist youth group, the Betar, which would entrench Shamir in the organization's ideology. Shamir's father was quite critical of the revisionist movement's demands for mass migration to the Holy Land, but by 1935, a decade after Stern's migration to the Mandate, did Yitzhak make his own trek. Yitzhak was much like other members to be known as part of the Lehi, former members of the Argun, infatuated and captivated by Avraham Stern's romantic vision. Yitzhak, along with his colleague Nathan Gillen Moore, would become part of the upper command for Stern's terror group. Yitzhak would take the underground name of Michael, after the Irish resistance leader Michael Collins. By 1942, majority of Jews in Palestinian jails were related one way or another to the Lehi. Yitzhak was one of those who received Stern's final letter. The underground needed to continue, and by September the 1st, he made a successful prison escape. Armed with Yahir's, which is Avraham Stern's, posthumous blessing, Shamir, the quiet man, recognized as the group's best organizer, had no trouble imposing control over the new underground. "We start anew," he announced in his flat voice to the small group assembled in the Orange Grove. He reorganized the Lehi. As it would henceforth be known, it would become a nearly airtight conspiracy. No one was to know anyone else's real name, only his or her code name. Operations, all of them planned by Shamir, were to be carried out by cells of 3 or 4. The dead Avraham Stern was still the impression and guiding spirit, but the hard-nosed new leader jettisoned Avraham Stern's more extravagant schemes. For one thing, Michael abandoned dreams of link to the Axis, a notion even more bizarre in 1943 than has been 2 years earlier. The other 2 or 3 who made up the newer upper trio of the Lehi was previously mentioned Nathan Moore and Yisrael Aldad. Joining the two as the head of the new revived underground was a 32-year-old Polish-born Bible teacher named Israel Eldad. They formed a triumvirate called the Center. Yellen Moore, a civil engineer and a mathematician who once edited a revisionist newspaper in Warsaw, was in charge of the political activities and represented the Lehi in negotiation with the Argun and the Haganah. With his thin wisp of a voice and tall, shapeless body, he looked more like a coffee pot than a ruthless gorilla. Eldad, known as the Doctor, was a brilliant, electric personality, enthralled by the fierce power of his own voice and its biblical message. He handled ideological indoctrination and wrote propaganda the way Mozart composed music. In the words of his former colleague Barak Nadel, and put him on the pedestal, "He will talk for 10 hours without trouble. He is what we need in Israel. He is what we in Israel call an astronaut. He knows nothing about what is happening on Earth." 2 intellectuals and 1 organizer, that would be the triumvirate. By 1944, the numbers of the underground had swelled, and one operation had put the underground back to the map of terror-sweeping Zion. The triumvirate had set, agreeing upon putting to death His Majesty's Minister of State for the Middle East, Walter Edward Guinness, aka Lord Minoy. The assassination would be executed by a small cell led by one Joshua Cohen, who would go in 47 to conduct a similar attack on Folke Bernadotte. Motivated by the minister's refusal to negotiate the migration of the Hungarian Jews into the region, the cell have shot Lord Mayon in his car. Though the Lehi had been denounced yet again by both the colonial government and their fellow Zionists for this action, the whole air of the region would shift gears in 1945. On July 26, 1945, Lehi received support from an unexpected source, London. With the election of the British Labour government, many mainstream Zionists expected the end of the reviled White Paper and the opening, at long last, of Palestine's opening door to European Jews who survived the war. Clement et al., expressing The hope that the British government may find it possible without delay to take steps to lift the restriction of the white papers on Jewish immigration to Palestine. Truman was not a wild hope, and the Labour Party had been staunchly opposed to the white paper policy from its birth. In a reply dated September 16, making Attlee's policy on Jewish immigration official, the Labour Prime Minister answered with a line worthy of his Conservative predecessors. Allowing more Jews into Palestine would set the Middle East ablaze. To avert that dire situation, the Labour government should permit a tickle of 1,500 Jews a month to enter Palestine. The Haganah, staunch opponent to the competitors of the Ergon and Lehi, had now felt an alliance between the organization. For all of Stern's preaching for a joint Zionist struggle against the Anglos' presence in Israel, it only took 3 years after his death for this to be realized. Something to also point out that the terror attacks in 1945 was rampant, and the UN's resolution on November 29, 1947 had created a Jewish and an Arab state within Palestine. The Arab, forming an alliance of the Arab Legion, retaliated by invading the nation after subjugated violence erupted in the Levant.